Hi everyone and welcome on Movies Summary Channel. Today I want to talk about the film Knowing, a 2009 American science fiction thriller film directed and co-produced by Alex Proyas and starring Nicolas Cage. The movie opens at an elementary school named William Dawes, in Lexington, Massachusetts, 1959. In the playground, we see Lucinda Embry, Laura Robinson, staring into the distance as if she is witnessing some catastrophic event. As she stares, whispering sounds are heard in the background. The teacher, Miss Taylor, Danielle Carter, repeatedly instructs Lucinda to come back into the class when the recess period ends. During the class session, Miss Taylor tells the students that as part of the school's official opening day celebration, the students will draw what they think the future is going to look like, and place the results in a time capsule. She tells them this is Lucinda's idea, important later. As they start drawing, we see Lucinda in a trance, furiously scribbling seemingly random numbers onto a sheet. It appears that the mysterious whispering voices are controlling Lucinda's thoughts and actions. As she collects the students' work, Miss Taylor must grab the sheet from Lucinda due to her trance-like state. During the ceremony, we see a crowd gathered as the time capsule is lowered into the school grounds. In the distance we can see Lucinda alone and staring at the proceedings. A few minutes later Miss Taylor notices Lucinda gone from her spot, and her balloon floating off. This sparks a search party for her. Alerted by noise coming from a door to a school storage closet, Miss Taylor finds Lucinda inside, her fingers bloodied as she scratched even more numbers into the wooden door. She is still crying and acting as if in a trance, before she begs Miss Taylor to make the whispering stop. The movie then flashes forward to the present day 50 years later. We are introduced to MIT professor John Koestler, Nicolas Cage, and his son Caleb at their house. After Caleb is asleep, we see John drinking from a bottle of whiskey, and here we realize he is still coping with the devastating loss of his wife. The next day, he gets to the celebration. He sees honored guest Miss Taylor giving a speech, and then the capsule is opened. Miss Taylor starts handing out the various pictures and drawings to the current students. As if by chance, Miss Taylor hands Lucinda's page of numbers to Caleb. As Caleb opens the letter and looks at it, he notices a strange-looking man in the distance dressed in a trench coat, and starts to hear whispering voices in his head. This shows that there is some sort of tie between young Caleb and Lucinda, as both can hear voices. Caleb takes the letter home. During dinner that evening, John notices the unusual letter with numbers sticking out of Caleb's backpack. The upper left part of the circular mark left by the wet cup's bottom highlights a section of numerals. John takes a close look at these numbers, which catch his attention. He walks over to his chalkboard and writes these numerals on it. After a few tries of separating them in different grouping combinations with no meaning, he suddenly finds the first 5 numbers are the date of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attack. Looking the event up on the internet, he finds that the 2,996 was the total number of victims. Startled, he writes the entire page of numbers onto the board, and with the help of the internet, he finds the number groupings seem to predict the dates of every major catastrophic event of the past 50 years, in the chronological order in which they happen, along with the body counts, including the bombing of the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, the Oklahoma City bombing, and Hurricane Katrina. There are a few groups of numbers left that are not circled and accounted for, meaning that these numbers may predict future events. He tells his colleague Phil about the numbers and is met with ridicule, and John storms out of the office. Determined, John tracks down Miss Taylor and speaks to her at her home. He finds out about Lucinda, and how she disappeared, and how they found her in the closet when she scratched numbers onto the door, again, important later. Unfortunately, Miss Taylor tells him that Lucinda died a while ago. John hopes to get Miss Taylor to help corroborate his theory, but it quickly becomes obvious that Miss Taylor, in her old age, has begun experiencing short-term memory loss that would make her word unreliable. Later that afternoon we see Caleb playing soccer by himself in the front lawn, when a black car filled with several of the mysterious-looking strangers approaches Caleb. One of the men reaches out of the car window and hands Caleb a smooth black stone. John sees this and rushes outside, but the men leave. The next day, on his way to pick up his son, John finds himself stuck on a highway in heavy rain, due to an accident. He phones Phil to apologize for their meeting earlier. He then uses his truck's GPS system to try and find an alternate route, but it shows that there are none. All of a sudden he notices the present latitude, longitude coordinates on the GPS system, and looks at Lucinda's letter and notices the same group of numbers immediately following the sequence that list the day's date. He gets out of his truck and approaches the accident site. As he is talking to the police, an airplane comes careening out of the sky and crashes directly into the path of his truck before continuing on to the fields next to the highway, where it explodes. Still later that night, Caleb is awakened in his room by one of the strangers, who points to the window. As Caleb goes to the window, he is greeted by a horrifying sight, a terrible forest fire and hundreds of animals being burned alive. As he screams, John rushes up to his room to comfort him, and then he notices the stranger again outside the house standing by the trees. He attempts to confront him, but the man is gone by the time John gets outside. The next day John and Caleb track down Diana Wayland, Rose Byrne, and her daughter Abby. Diana is Lucinda's daughter. They are at a museum when John uses Caleb as a ploy to start a discussion with Diana. He invites her and Abby for drinks and they walk to the restaurant. There John reveals the truth that in fact it wasn't a random meeting, but that he tracked her down due to her mother and the page of numbers. He tells her the truth about the numbers, and wants her help. Angered by this deception, Diana storms off with Abby, paying only minimal attention as he tries to tell her that he was at the plane crash the previous day. John pleads that he wants to save his son, thinking Caleb is in danger, but Diana says she can't help. Later on, John is at home when his attention is grabbed by a television news alert of a possible terrorist attack in New York. Checking the number groupings in Lucinda's letter, he finds that the coordinates show the corner of Lafayette and Worth Streets in Manhattan. The next day he has Grace babysit Caleb, and drives himself to New York on a personal mission to try to do what he can about the potential terrorist threat. We next see the tracks being improperly switched due to electrical malfunction, and this causes the train to veer onto the wrong tracks and straight into the path of a parked train at full speed. The train goes off the tracks and creates a path of death and destruction as it careens out of control through the crowded platform. When John gets back home, he finds Diana and Abby sitting outside his house. Diana is now sympathetic to him. She remembers what John told her about the date of October 19th. The date listed in the last grouping of numbers. Lucinda used to talk about that date often, saying it was the day that Diana would die. The four of them all drive to Lucinda's old trailer out in the middle of the woods to find more clues. When they get to the trailer, they leave the sleeping kids in the truck and walk inside. As they near the front door, Diana is still reading the numerical list and pauses. She says Abby sometimes wrote things backwards and the final number on the list, 33. Diana believes is actually EE written backwards. In the main room John sees numerous newspaper clippings of disasters around the world pasted on the wall. At this point the mysterious strangers appear again and approach the truck, and we can hear the mysterious voices start to appear. Caleb and Abby watch the mysterious men converge on the truck. When Abby starts to open one of the doors, Caleb jams on the truck's horn. John and Diana run to the truck. In the morning, Abby gives John the Judgment Day picture that was in the trailer. John notices that she had colored in the shining object in the middle of the drawing and made it look like the sun. This is when it suddenly dawns on John that the final event is related to the sun. They all drive to John's lab office, where he meets Phil. John mentions to him about a hypothetical catastrophic solar flare model they worked on before. John says that in fact this model is of the Earth, and that this flare will destroy all life on the planet. He tells Phil to go home and spend time with his wife. As he walks out he tells Diana about the coming disaster, and she breaks down and says she wants to protect her daughter. They both agree that they will try to hide out this event by going to some remote caves not known to the public. Going back to John's place, they all scramble to gather clothes and supplies to take with them. As they are packing, John's thoughts go back to the last part of Lucinda's list, and he realizes that unlike the previous predictions, there were no coordinates. He then remembers Miss Taylor's discussion about Lucinda scratching numbers onto the closet door. They all rush to the school. Using a heating gun and scraper, John frantically tries to find the numbers, as Diana's panic rises to fever pitch. Thinking the solar flare could happen at any moment, Diana takes Abby and Caleb in her own car and drives off to the caves, leaving John. As soon as he finds the last set of numbers, he writes them down and runs out to his truck but realizes they are all gone. John is able to reach Diana on her cell phone, and he desperately tries to convince her to take both kids to Lucinda's trailer instead of the caves. He then drops the bombshell on her that this flare will penetrate miles underground and will kill everyone, making underground cave shelters meaningless, and that the only choice now is to go to the trailer. The conversation ends, and Diana stops at a gas station. As she goes to the pay window, she notices the television inside showing an emergency broadcast alert. Caleb gets out of the car and calls his dad from a payphone. He is only able to tell his dad that they are at a gas station. As Caleb is talking, he is taken by the mysterious stranger, who gets in Diana's car and drives off with the two kids. Seeing this, Diana runs after them in a near hysterical state, and jumps into an idle SUV at one of the pumps to give chase. And as she crosses the intersection, she is violently T-boned by a huge truck, causing the SUV to flip over and we see her unconscious. As they call her time of death, John notices it is just past midnight, signifying that it is now October 19th, the date of the final disaster and Diana's date of death predicted by her mother. After holding her hand and saying a few final parting words, John goes off to Lucinda's trailer. Agonizing over his missing son, Caleb suddenly appears safe and calm, holding a white rabbit. We now realize that the reason why the stranger took Caleb and Abby was because Diana was not going to take them to Lucinda's trailer. Caleb tells his dad that the mysterious strangers are taking them away, meaning to a safer place away from the impending catastrophe, and they were the ones who sent out the mysterious message so preparations could be made. We then see 4 of the mysterious strangers standing in front of them. We then see a pattern of lights high in the sky, and then out of the clouds an enormous spacecraft emerges. As they get ready to move towards the orb, John sadly realizes that the aliens came to specifically save Caleb and Abby, and not him. As the ship leaves the Earth, we notice hundreds of other ships also leaving, showing that many children from around the world were also being saved. John is awoken the next day by a light rain and eerie orange glow in the sky from the solar flares. He goes to his parents' home, where Grace hugs him. He tells her Caleb is in a safe place now. John goes to hug his father. Grace and Mrs. Koestler join John and Reverend Koestler in a group hug and hold on to each other as the final massive solar flare incinerates and vaporizes everything in the city. The last shot of Earth is from space as it is breaking up. We then see what appears to be the landscape of a faraway planet, full of odd colors, yet lush with plant life. The spaceship we saw earlier appears, and drops off young Caleb and Abby onto the surface with their pet rabbits before leaving. We see more spaceships arrive to drop more children, and the final shot is of Caleb and Abby running toward a huge and magnificent glowing tree in the background.